Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and today is the 28th day of February 2024, and my channel is simply called Discerning What is True. I'm live here on Facebook. I'm also live on YouTube and also on Odyssey. I'm going to explain the 4 point of the 5 points of Arminianism and Calvinism. And what I do is, what I'm doing, I should say, is just explaining these in a very short and snippet type of ways, and what the major two perspectives in the Protestant faith. Uh, most are in the actually are in the Armenian faith in some ways. That would be, and I neglected to say simply, is most are are the Baptist group of people, which I neglected to say. They don't speak a lot about Arminianism that is in their churches, but they are Armenian um, in their belief system. And you really the major ones actually are that is the two distinct groups here, Armenians and Calvinists. The Armenians are what I would call simply the larger branch, especially here in the United States. And the key with the Calvinists are what I would call in the minority. The only major player in the um, Calvinist camp would be the Presbyterians. They're really only major. There you have three different distinct groups that are in the Calvinist camp. Would be what you call the Reformed Baptists, which is somewhat aiming towards Calvinism. Then you have what you call the Presbyterians and the Christian Reformed churches, the CRCs, which I think the Reformed churches were actually their growth power. That is, their power base was actually in Netherlands, and the Presbyterians base was at one time was in France or parts of Switzerland, which I don't know if you understand anything to do with what I would call the Huguenots, or what we call in France, who eventually were raided by the Catholics, were Calvinists in France. Naturally, John Calvin, was actually from Paris, France, educated at the University of Paris, and eventually went to Geneva many years ago. That is in the 1500s. So let's get to the 4 point of the 5 points of the differences between both sides. Again, this is a little. This is to show you the literal interpretation of scriptures, which I do not adhere to. My point is this to make you aware that simply is this. This doesn't make any sense in some ways because in the esoteric perspective, there is no. Um, there is all of us are children of God in the first place. You see, but we have to have what I would call a realization of something happening to us. If not, we reincarnate here over and over again until we get to that particular point. Um, but the two major groups here would not adhere to any type of reincarnation perspective. Again, they would believe in you're here one time and you have to make a choice when you're here the first time, so to speak. So that puts a lot of pressure on people, which they don't even know themselves. The pressure is simply is that you're only here one time, and they're telling you that you have two choices, heaven or hell. Okay, and that Jesus did all the work for you, so to speak. That type of thing. When that doesn't make any sense at all. Okay, it doesn't. So here's the Armenian perspective, and also the Calvinist viewpoint. But first, what we call, again, this is part of what they call TULIP. TULIP stands for total depravity. This is their perspective. They believe that simply is that you're a wretch, that you're the lowest of the low. John Calvin would be the one who inspired this type of theology, and he would speak simply as the total depravity, that you are not able to save yourself. Well, that kind of goes in, I don't agree with that neither. Do you? Do you see yourself such a bad person to the point that basically you're not able to save yourself? Well, actually, we are responsible to save ourselves, but not in the church. You see, there are symbols in the church that actually show certain things that are true. Okay, but their theology is completely messed up. So, total depravity would be the T, and the U would be the unconditional election. In other words, God chooses you, and you're either elected or you're not. There's no middle ground. Then you have the L of the tulip, which is limited atonement, which I just did a while ago. And now we're dealing with the I, which is called irresistible grace. So we're looking at the Arminian perspective here, and just reading a little short paragraph here a little bit because it gets to the point. The Spirit calls inwardly, this is the Arminian perspective, the Spirit calls inwardly all those who are called outwardly by the gospel imitation. He does all that he can to bring every sinner to save salvation. Well, sinner to me is simply someone who is not consciously aware of who he is. Okay. And so this is the perplexity of people. They don't understand it. They think, and I've gone through this on the first one, that being a sinner, we're created, and we're already, because we come in this world, we're already considered a sinner. Okay, in God's eye, or I should say, in man's eye. Let's continue on. The Spirit calls inwardly to all those who are called outwardly by the gospel invitation. He does all he can to bring about what we call every sinner to become saved. But inasmuch as man is free, he can successfully resist the Spirit's call. Of course he can. I agree with that. But again, we have to realize that a literal interpretation here, and a literal interpretation is bygone, folks. It no longer stands. We're moving on to a different perspective and understanding that simply all of us are children of God, but we still have to transcend. We all have to ascend. We have, in a way, and I don't like to use that word ascension, but in reality, we must find ourselves, you see, because we came from God. We are spirits. Our spirits live forever. Our body doesn't. And God, in His grace, is so good to us that He allows us to reincarnate here many, many, many times until we get it. Okay? So you see, you have the opportunity. You're not going to go to hell. You're not going to heaven, but you're going to have the opportunity to see. So what I'm trying to say is like a God figure, like God should say, He allows His children many, many times to be incarnated here in order for them to come to the recognition that they actually did come from God. Okay? And they just don't know that, because once they come here, they forget. They don't know. And that's part of the situation. And most people, that's His grace. That's His goodness to us. It's not judgment. But what we get from the Calvinist perspective is always judgment from God. It's like He's a tyrant. That should scare you. It should scare you to get out of those churches, so to speak, not be a part of them. Anyway, I kind of got on a diatribe again. The Spirit cannot regenerate the sinner until he believes, the faith which is man's contribution. In other words, he gives something to the table, so to speak. Which that would be completely opposite what the Calvinists speak of. Proceeds and makes possible the new birth. Thus, man's free will limits the Spirit in the application of Christ's saving work. So, in other words, you have a choice of choosing or not. Okay. The Holy Spirit can draw to Christ only those who allow Him to have His way with them. Until the sinner responds, the Spirit cannot give life. God's grace, therefore, is not invincible. It can be, and often is, resisted and thwarted by men. Well, that's if you look at it in literal terms, yes, it can be rejected, and is rejected by people. Some people see it and say, this is a farce. This is not true. Some people have come to the realization simply this is a farce. They come to the realization that this is all a lie. But they don't go any further. They don't understand simply is that the scriptures itself, again, are esoteric. They're not exoteric. They're esoteric. They're speaking to you internally. The Spirit is already within you. You just have to get the fire going. The light is already in you. That's your pineal gland. But you must expand it, so to speak, and come to the awareness of that, you see. And that's what we would call ascension, or coming to the truth of what this place is all about. And usually there is something that has to happen to you. There has to be an encounter with God or spirit, you see. It doesn't, it's not all, it's, part of it is your responsibility, yes, as long as you do the right thing, so to speak, and you have the right spirit about you. But it's not based upon what we're saying from man's perspective here, you see. So again, like I said earlier, that this includes the Baptist denominations, the Methodists, probably the Pentecostals somewhat, and the Assembly of Gods, although they tend to trip off on other areas, which isn't, we won't go there right now. The Calvinists believe something else, what they would call it. They wouldn't call it the Holy Spirit able to be effectually resisted. They said it's the effectively call of the Spirit or irresistible grace, which we spoke about here earlier. In addition to the outward general call to salvation, which is made to everyone who hears the gospel, the Holy Spirit extends to the elect. And this is part of the chosen they're thinking of, the elect, a special inward call that inevitably brings them to salvation. So here's the key with me. I'm going to share this with you. I chose to become a Christian when I was 8 years old in a children's church. And I thought it was real. I really did. Because I was telling my classmates at school that I'd become a Christian. I actually didn't say Christian. I said, I'm a born-again Christian, you see. This was in the 3rd grade. I remember the teacher. Her name was Miss Colson, Colson, in school in Mooresville, North Carolina. I remember all these things that I spoke to people. I was cheerfully about it, whole thing, such and such. I really believed this. I actually thought it was authentic. My parents congratulated me. They bought me a Bible, such and such. I was congratulated not only by my parents, but my grandparents, and by others, such and such, who were in the church, such and such. And you see, that's how I kind of get this feeling, such and such. But so in reality, when I come along at, around 41 or 42 years old, I begin to realize something's wrong. And eventually I begin to poo-poo these ideas. So how does that work with what happens with the Calvinists here? They would say, basically, you lost your salvation, you see. Well, yeah, I did. In a part way, yes. But in reality, what I'm trying to share simply is that was a literal interpretation, you see. I didn't know any better, you see. This is what I find the fallacy of most churches is they choose to use, they tend to create what I call this idea of bringing in kids at a very young age and get decisions out of them. That's what they're there for. They don't think they're doing that, but that's what they are doing. So that they will be there forever. That no one would ever even, quote unquote, object and say, wait a minute, what did I do when I was 8 years old or 7 years old or 6 or whatever at Vacation Bible School? I said I was going to be a Christian, but I'm looking at my life and nothing's changed. Of course, nothing's changed. Nothing at all has changed. Now, you may be trying to live it on an outward phrase, doing it in the flesh instead of the spirit, which in reality means that you never were saved. You never were a Christian. You see this? But they will see it simply as that I was a Christian and I, quote unquote, either backslide or never were a Christian. You see, that's what the Calvinists would see. So let's continue on. The external call, which is made to all without distinction, can be and often is rejected, whereas the internal call, which is made only in the elect, so this is like God chooses you, you see, and that when you do this simply is when you say that God does this stuff, you already set the perception that God chooses you and God doesn't. Do you understand that? Do you understand the fallacy of that? Because the fallacy simply when you reject it, well, I didn't really reject it because God didn't allow it. You see, this is this God's entered the picture here and he's doing stuff he's not supposed to be doing. If you have free will, what is this all about? So by means of a special call, the Spirit irresistibly draws sinners to Christ. He is not limited in his work of applying salvation to man's will, nor is he dependent on man's cooperation for success. So in other words, it's not even dependent upon man's success here, man's choosing. In other words, the call is so strong, and God's going to save you because you're supposed to be called. Whoa, 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 whoa. So they cancel out free will. They dismiss it. The Spirit graciously causes the elect sinner to cooperate, you see, in a banal way, to believe, to repent, to come freely and willingly to Christ. God's grace, therefore, is invincible. It never fails to result in the salvation of those to whom it is extended. And so when you think about the Calvinist perspective here, it's really scary, isn't it? But it's not true on either side now. And this is what you gotta understand. This is what you gotta think here, folks. You gotta understand simply is that you've been lied to all your life in the church. Not on purpose, so to speak, because most of these people don't know what they're doing. They're just simply doing what they're told. That's what they believe. They've never even asked them questions why they are actually in the church. I just chose to such and such. Yeah, but anything happen? No. You can see it in their own lives sometimes. There's some that basically you could say to come to church. They're drunk the night before, and the next day they are quote unquote in church the next morning as though nothing happened. So really nothing changed. And I'm just giving that as an illustration. I'm not saying this drinking is always the bad thing. I'm just saying simply is that when you have this idea, you see, and I live in the buckle of the Bible Belt. Okay, so this thing goes on all the time. It's not as bad as it used to be because I think basically things are changing. I don't know if they're changing for the better, but I do see simply is that the height, and I don't even know if it was better back then either. I think there's another error on what we think is, what we thought, such and such. So again, I'm pointing out simply is that the Calvinists say simply is you're either you're a reprobate, means that simply God chose you, you were not chosen. How would you feel about that if you thought that that was the way it was? How would you feel that God simply rejected you, which is not, but this is how they teach this stuff. It's a great thing when people claim that they're Calvinists, such and such, and they believe this stuff. But the point simply is that what about the other side? Because what you're going to say this very clearly, folks. Those of you who think you've been called, you don't live it either. You see, and they'll keep saying it simply as that's part of his effective grace, such and such he allows, such and such you're just growing. That's kind of a cop out, folks. It's not true. They created this. It's man's idea to create this, to make people feel, okay, you're not as bad as you think you are, but you're not as good as you think you are neither. And I don't agree with the Arminian perspective because I realize the Arminians they're just as lost as the Calvinists are. And I think it's really interesting also when you think about this, there are only two perspectives. It's either or. It kind of reminds me a lot of things what we see in America or in the Western world is either or. There's no third position or fourth position about these things. It's just simply either or, which reality simply means it means division, which is that's what you see everywhere is division all around you. You see it in churches, you see it in politics, you see it everywhere. You see it in what we call the color of skins. People divide because of the color of skin, such and such. So you see these either or type of situations in life here. It's either right or wrong. It's either wrong, you're 100% wrong, or you're right 100% of the time, you see. And that's not true of anything in our lives, folks. It's not, you see. So I don't want to go longer than 20 minutes, so it's almost there, 20 minutes. And I don't, we have one more we'll do, but it's not that it's not that's, it's just basically you can lose your salvation or not. That's what the fifth one's based upon, but I'll do that a little later. But thank you for being here. Again, my channel is simply called Discerning What is True. Today's the 28th day of February 2024. And guess what? It's time to go. I appreciate you being here. Again, I am trying to make it strongly to you that you need to look at, you see these 2 points here. If you're in the church and you desire to know the truth, there's nothing outside of you, you see. It's all internal. And what the churches are teaching you is something outside of you. You see, because your spirit comes from God. Okay. That's the goodness in you. Your battle has always been the flesh, or what they would call the flesh, you see. And they understand that somewhat, yes. But again, like I say, you're not going to find heaven. You're not going to find heaven in the church neither, because heaven's not there neither, you see. And so, I suggest sometimes you look into Phil Langdon. He's the only one I know that really understands this, not what I'm talking about, but he understands some of what I'm talking about, yes. But he goes deeper than I do, by far, because he's ascended. He understands why he's here. And unfortunately, there's not many people on this planet that does. So I would encourage you to go to Phil Langdon on his YouTube channel and look into some of these things he shares. He's transcended. He's, ascended in some ways. There are other words. I don't like to use these words, but basically, his pineal gland is open. It opened for him. Okay. And he explains that a little bit. Goes in it, shares a little bit. And he's not fake. He's not fake. There's nothing fake about him as far as I can tell. He's not asking for money. Never has asked for any money. And you look out here and you see all these churches out here and the people who claim they're such and such. They're asking for money. That's your red flag, folks, already. That's the major red flag of all these people. Because people do things for money. And if they do things for money, they're not actually telling you the truth, are they? I'm not saying that people even only ask you for truth, but this is actually a bigger red flag when people ask you. Same thing with actually asking you to pay them for astrology deal too. Because it's all generalized. It could be anybody on the street that can say these things. You see, these people are clever, and they're very clever, and you put your belief in them, and you deceive your own self. You see, this whole world and this reality is a way for you to grow up. There are people who are here to misguide you. Almost all people are out here to misguide you, but mostly the issue is a lot to do with money. The other one's to do with what we call being popular, so to speak. And I'm not popular, and I don't care to be popular, because I go against the grain, so to speak, here when I see these things. And that's why I'm sharing this for you guys. So thank you again. I've gone past 20 minutes, so you take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.